there was a fantastic piece in the Wall Street Journal written by Peggy Noonan. Some of you may be familiar with Peggy Noonan. I think she's usually brilliant, and sometimes I disagree with her, but that's, of course, the case with everyone. But I thought her analysis of the Christian movement, spurred on in large part, I believe, by Charlie Kirk, and catalyst at the memorial of Charlie this past Sunday. I thought this was a great description of what is happening in the conservative movement more broadly, but where Christians stack up and where they used to be in relation to the political discourse in this country. I'm going to read quite a bit of this, but it's longer than this, but I pulled out all the stuff that I thought was good. This is, again, Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal. At the memorial, there was an altar call, at a public memorial for a political figure. It was a singular and moving moment. It was the dignity and peacefulness of the crowd. They didn't indulge their anger or cry out against their foe. It was as if they understood that that would be bad for the country. We've remarked about that several times before on this show. Erica talked about it in her speech. There was no riots. There was no violence. There was prayer and vigils after Charlie was murdered. Peggy Noonan continues, "It looks to me as if a lot of these folks have been in some larger transit since 2015, as Kirk himself was. He entered the public stage to speak politics, but said by the end of this great work, he was speaking of Christ. The Secretary of State of the United States gave personal testimony on why Christ is in history and in his life, on what Christ is in history and in his life. The Vice President did the same. The whole thing was self-consciously and explicitly Christian. Kirk's widow Erica talked of new converts and asked the crowds to help them. She said of her husband's assassin, that young man, I forgive him, and she received a standing ovation. A standing ovation, by the way, that lasted, I believe, over a minute because of how moving and powerful it was. We've talked about that on the show already. Noonan continues, as I watched, I realized this is the true sound and tone of the Republican Party right now. This is the takeover of the previously patronized. She goes on to talk about the Reagan administration and how at the time, the Reagan administration was not against Christians. They weren't anti-Christian in any way, shape, or form, but Christians had a seat at a table that was larger and more encompassing of what the party was at the time. She then goes on to say this, again, keeping that Reagan to now comparison in mind. As I watched the Kirk Memorial, I thought the people in that audience are the sons and daughters of the patronized Christians of the old White House. They had a seat at the table, but they are now at the head of the table. She then quotes somebody named Gary Bauer, who runs the Family Research Council, and he said this, I don't know why this especially grabbed me. She's talking about Erica Kirk in her speech. He's talking about Erica's speech. Charlie wanted to save the lost boys of the West. Gary goes on to say that that was just incredible. Young men robbed of their inheritance, taught that their countries are worthless, told they are toxic. They are the cause of all the problems. And he says, we see that impact everywhere. If we can't save our sons, it's over. He thinks America may be at the start of a religious revival. And just very briefly, I want to break away from this before we kind of wrap up into the conclusion. What does that actually look like in practice on the other side of the political aisle? I think we've all seen numerous instances of people condemning young men for the simple the crime of being a young man, especially religious young men. I think that is probably best described and summarized in this Hillary Clinton clip. Watch this clip 8.
The idea that you could turn the clock back and try to recreate a world that never was, dominated by, let's say it, white men of a certain persuasion, a certain religion, a certain point of view, a certain ideology, is just doing such damage to what we should be aiming for. And we were on the path toward that. I mean, imperfectly, lots of, bumps along the way, but I agree with you, we were on the right trajectory.
The problem that liberals are going to have is that their leaders still think that. We were a better country when both Republicans and Democrats agreed, hey, religious and moral values is a good thing to hold. We can disagree on how much money a certain system gets or how much attention a certain project gets in the United States, but we all agree that we are a moral, Christian based country. That's where we started from. That is what has made us great, and we should continue that. But that's not what the left has been doing for far too long. And I think the thing that is evident of this turning point that we're seeing in a Christian revival post Charlie Kirk and the memorial is the fact that I don't think they understand. That was Hillary Clinton a couple days ago. That wasn't like several years ago. I don't think they understand the position that they are now in. Now, we're going to read the last part of Peggy Noonan's piece in the Wall Street Journal here, where she talks about, there are possibly some reservations with that, because the left is going to say, well, you don't want a theocracy, which I actually do, but that's not the point I'm trying to make here. But the broader scope of this is we saw political leaders at the memorial making religious statements about their own personal belief. They weren't saying, we as a country need to do XYZ because that's how I interpret the Bible. It was, no, this is my relationship with God. This is my relationship with Jesus. This is how I understand Christianity in my own personal life. And that's who I am. I'm going to lead as I am, but it's a internal relationship with Christ myself, as opposed to this idea of obscuring whatever actual religious belief there is and using that to govern, right? There are differences, right? There's a difference between somebody who's just going to say the things that they think Christians want to hear and someone who actually has a relationship with God and acts out of their own personal being, but the relationship is there and it's intact. Now, of course, that can be, up for debate on who's being honest and who's being genuine, but I think everybody there was in fact being genuine. People come to mind, J.D. Vance, Secretary Rubio. I think those guys are serious. I think they are genuine in what they are saying, and because of that, I trust them wholeheartedly to lead the country in a correct direction. Wrapping up Noonan's piece, she says this: reservations? Of course. If it's true, it feels European. The Christian Democrats are not American. I'm not sure that sentence feels clunky, but maybe I copy and pasted it weird. She says this: as a Christian, I see things through a Christian lens, but big democracies demand many lenses to maintain peace in the political sphere. Modern democracies get thrown in part by not letting those lines get too vivid. The demarcations are too sharp. A big blur can be helpful, but that would be a different column, different article, different time, different place to talk about that. What I think I see evolving is big. That wasn't just a memorial. It was a stepping forward in a new way of Christians and the Republican Party, which I think encapsulates the entire thing perfectly. Again, I thought that piece from the Wall Street Journal, Peggy Noonan, they're writing in the Wall Street Journal, was a fantastic description of what exactly is going on. It's something that I think we all felt, but it's kind of intangible when you try to pinpoint it. And pinpointing it, can be a pretty difficult task to do. Now, I don't want to throw the sentiment of this segment off too much, but I do think there is another side of things that gets encapsulated in how, certain people in the way that they think, the libs think, how they look at the world and people and perspective. And unfortunately, that is encapsulated in this very short clip between former TV hosts Joy Reid and Don Lemon. Watch this clip, which I think is... it kind of perfectly exemplifies the exact opposite of what the Christian right is doing at the moment. Check out clip 9.
I can't stand JD Vance. Let's just be clear. There's nothing he could do. He could literally rescue my cat out of a burning building, and I would still hate JD Vance.
Redemption is a thing. And I think conservatives more than ever understand that, especially with Erica's speech. And I know I've talked a lot about it, but I can't exaggerate how impactful I think that was, how impressive I think she is, and how moving that moment was. Now, take the exact opposite of that, and that's what you get. I can't stand this person. There is nothing they can do. Conservatives and Christians don't think that way. We won't think that way, and we will continue to live our lives knowing that redemption is possible. I maybe get in trouble for this, but if Hillary Clinton, for some reason, I don't know, hell froze over, pigs started to fly, said, I believe that abortion is murder. I believe that we should build a wall and keep illegals out of the country. I believe that we should be fiscally responsible. There is nothing in me that says, well, just because she's Hillary Clinton doesn't mean I think that she can't do all of the right things. I would be like, yeah, great, welcome. Welcome. We will welcome you with open arms. That is not the way the other side looks at things. They look at people that they don't like and therefore demonize them regardless of what they do. That is the sentiment now of the two sides of the political aisle. You've got one side that is forgiving and actively trying to love their enemies, and you've got the other side that says, I don't care if my political opponent does miracles and saves millions of people, or my cat from a tree, which is the weird example Joy Reid gave. We will still hate them. Okay, good luck with that. Good luck with that personally in your heart and trying to go forward and living a fulfilling life, and good luck with that politically as well. We here on the conservative aisle will lean into our tradition and our moral values and our Christ-centered lives. And if I were to put money on it, I think we're going to do better, both personally and politically. I thought that piece was fascinating. I thought it was really interesting. And I know we've kind of talked about this stuff before, but I think there's enough value there to continue talking about the impact that Charlie had, yes, on politics, but more importantly on Christianity and the revival that I think and I hope we are starting to see the start of in this country.